Hi everybody, it's Colin Stevenson here, joined by my hero John Lenhart. Hi John.
Hi.
We have just discussed last week your college, John, and your story through college, and it took us right up to the point where Procter & Gamble offered you a job on the spot when you went into the building. Now, as far as I believe it's just about to get very interesting. And take us on to the kind of next level of your story. So if you would like to kind of take us from where we left off in the last video, please.
Yeah, so what happened was I had this job offer first week of October. I knew I was going to Dow, so it was nice to have the Procter & Gamble offer. But what happened was I kept asking Dow, when are you going to send the offer? And they go, it's coming, it's coming. And then in January, Procter & Gamble said, are you accepting our offer or not? And I called up Dow and I said, are you offering me or not? Because I'm not going to drop this offer and then you not give me an offer.
Yep.
And Procter & Gamble gave me a deadline. Dow didn't give me an offer. So then I took the Procter & Gamble. And then 3 weeks later, Dow sent me an offer. And I was like, too late. I'm going to Procter & Gamble. So that's how I ended up Procter & Gamble. And one of the things I've told people is, I think if you have a choice between two jobs, pick the bigger company because the training's better and you can always go from a bigger to a smaller. There was no way to go from any company to Procter & Gamble. And so Procter & Gamble, that first year, they trained us better than I think any other company could possibly train us. Every week on half day on Friday, we got some sort of training. So somewhere at that point, we went through Myers-Briggs.
Yes.
And I took the Myers-Briggs test and I came out as an INTJ. And that is known as an architect. So there's 3 characteristics of an INTJ, and I'd like to talk about my time in Procter & Gamble relative to me being an INTJ. So the first thing is INTJs are imaginative.
Yep.
Now I got identified, Procter & Gamble was very much a militaristic company. There were all these people in the company that had, in the upper ranks, there were white males and they were all in the military. And so there were rules like your desk had to touch 2 walls. If you were at this level, your desk had to touch at least 1 wall. At this level, you could only have your desk not touch any walls at this level. Like those are the type of things in this company, like very analytical. And I was very creative. I got identified as one of the 12 people in the entire company who was a creative person. And once a month, I'd go to these meetings where a group of us would brainstorm on advertising. We'd brainstorm on different new products. Like I was one of the 12 most creative or imaginative people in the entire company. So the big thing that made me imaginative is I was a formulator. They hire you at Procter & Gamble to be a project manager. But the problem was I started working on Joy, Liquid Joy, and the woman whose job I was taking, she was this very good looking and super sweet, the sweetest person I've ever met in my life. And she looked like Jane Kennedy. I don't know if you remember who Jane Kennedy was, but she was this announcer in football and she was this Miss America and everybody loved this woman who I was replacing. And there were 5 technicians that essentially worked for her. So when I took her spot, none of these guys liked me.
Of course
they hated me. I was the cause of them losing this beauty queen. And I got to tell you a quick story about her. Again, super nice. She kind of trained me, in the job for the first month. And one of the things I noticed early on, now this is 1985, there were certain people in the company that were experts at certain technologies. And she was introducing them to me while working on her project. And so I went into this room with this older white guy, PhD in this area. And she was asking him questions about her project technically, and he was quoting the opposite answer. And it was because he was staring at her instead of listening at her. And when we walked out, I said, that is not how that reaction works. He was saying it back. She goes, no, he's an expert. I'm like, how do I say this to the nicest person in the world that every guy is not thinking about you? They're thinking about doing stuff to you. Even this old white guy, to the point he's telling you wrong. It made me wonder, like, if these beautiful women, part of the reason they have their information wrong is they're getting their information from guys, the experts, who aren't quoting things right because they're not They don't have all their brain when they're talking to these women. So anyways, none of these guys would formulate for me. It was their job to make the product. I had a chemistry background. I had a chemistry lab. I'd won all these awards. I'm like, I'll formulate for myself. So I was literally the only new hire, chemical engineer, project manager who formulated. And so I had to go to the bench and formulate my own stuff. And so that's where I learned that. Now, the issue is liquids are really challenging, and they were really new at that time in the 80s. Most everything everybody sold was a powder.
Yeah.
And the way you make a powder is you make a slurry like oatmeal, and you spray it through a nozzle and let it fall 100 feet while you shoot 900-degree air up at it, and it puffs like popcorn. So all the chemicals are locked in. A liquid, every ingredient in that liquid can interact with every other ingredient. Liquids are really challenging. And I was the only, there were 7 new hires in that building. I was the only one working on liquids. Everybody else was working on powders. And so what happened was I learned to formulate liquids. And after a year, I got promoted to Liquid Tide. Now, Liquid Tide, I was on the 3rd version. I was working on the 3rd version of Liquid Tide. It was brand new. Liquid Tide had over 30 ingredients. Some of those ingredients are distributions of unique chemicals. So you're looking at a product that has somewhere around 18,000 unique chemicals all coming in touch with each other. And the way to make this it was a nightmare to put this thing together. It's very tough. When I went to that group, they said, we make everyone make, Liquid Tide by themselves. First time, basically to humble them. I'm like, let's do this. And my guys ended up liking me. They're like, John can handle it. I made Liquid Tide the first time. It was within spec, and everybody, that's like the first time it had ever happened, but they didn't know I was already formulating. So what happened was I'm trying to make this Liquid Tide, and the challenge of this Liquid Tide was trying to get, this thing out the door. And so in order to do that, I started modeling. And if you think about it, every interaction is a dimension. And so in order to figure out how to fix this formula, you have to kind of see where you're at. And so I trained myself to see into 7 dimensions. So if you imagine a cube, so it's 3 dimensions. And then if you imagine like a surface in that cube, like if the surface went up, then you could say, oh, when these 3 go to this point, you're going to get the benefit. That's 4 dimensions. And then if you imagine that cube of 4 dimensions on a 3-dimensional plot, that's 7 dimensions. So that's how I used to formulate. I used to formulate looking into 7 dimensions to try to pull things together. Now, the imaginative, is also where I come by my nickname Reb or Rebel that you quoted earlier. So one of the guys were like, you're a rebel. You're Johnny Reb. You're a rebel. So I got called Rebel. Now, when I was a kid, my hero was Evel Knievel. And so I got a fake tooth and I got a lot of bumps and bruises and things on my body because I used to jump over stuff. And it was never about whether I could make it or not. You don't jump because you know you can make it. You jump to find out if you can make it. And I crashed half the time and it never bothered me. And so that's kind of the mentality. I'm not going to back down from a fight. And I'm not going to do something just because I know it can work. Maybe it won't. What's the worst that could happen? So I was doing a lot of things nobody else was doing. You know, that was a bachelor's, you know, a PhD, or, you know, as a chemical engineer. Nobody else was doing these things. So one of the things I was doing is I was hosting recruits all the time. So basically, part of the year, I just ate generic macaroni and cheese and spaghetti. And then when recruiting season came by, I would offer to host every recruiting visit. I'd go to these great restaurants. I'd eat all this meat. I was like a half a year vegetarian. So I was in the middle of all the recruiting, in the middle of you know, seeing all these people. The other thing was I played sports. You know, nobody played sports. So you asked about playing sports. I'll tell you 2 quick stories about sports. One was I joined kind of through work, but outside of work. Some of the people in work, some people outside. I joined a co-ed volleyball team that was all black. So I was the only white person on this co-ed volleyball team. We were a B League team in Cincinnati. We would go to the Over the Rhine area Saturday mornings to practice, which has had its issues. And we would scrimmage against this A team. They had a guy on the team's the greatest volleyball player I've ever seen. He looked like Michael Jordan. He would jump up, the net would come up to here, and in midair, he would look to see where he wanted to spike it. And with either hand, he could put the ball wherever he wanted to put it. I've never seen anybody like that. And one of the times, there was a woman on our team that just was, I'd say she's perceiver. And she perceived something about me wrong in one of these practices. Now, remember, I'm in a gym. I'm the only white person in a gym of about 30 black people. And she started telling me where I was wrong. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, she's a black woman. She's a leader. She's tough. She can take this. And I'm just, what? And I asked her, and I go, no, this is what happened, and this happened, and you did that wrong. And you think about it, everybody in the gym is, I just realized everybody in the gym is stopping, just watching me, like, how are you going to handle it? But I'm like, what? I'm not going to back down, and I'm not going to be nice, and I'm not going to be rude. I'm not going to be racist, but she's a person and she's wrong. And here's how I'm going to let her know she's wrong. And this is how it's wrong. And I said that, she said something, I said something. She's like, okay, I'm okay. And we all went back to playing. And it's like, I didn't see her as black. I saw her as a person, and I saw her, but in my brain, this tree was like, she's an excellent person, and she handled it excellently. I treated her excellently. We all handled it fine. We ended up winning the league, our B League team. So I have a little volleyball trophy from winning a B League team. My best sports memory was we had an indoor soccer team, and sometimes we could play games at midnight on a Wednesday night. So you finish the game, you go home, you take a shower, you're all still jacked up. You don't fall asleep till 3, and then you got to show up to work like this, a light shirt and a tie, and you've had 3 hours sleep, and it was a work team playing in a city league. We were all dragging Thursday mornings when we had a late season, and we never won a game. We got crushed 7-1, 8-1, and we'd always say, man, it'd be worse if we didn't have this goalie. And what happened was our goalie was missing, and I was like, I'm playing goalie. I'm playing goalie tonight. And I played goalie. We won 1-0. I had a shutout. And again, I never played indoor soccer. I haven't played indoor soccer since that game, okay? So it's like, that was my greatest moment. I'm like, you guys were happy with that guy all along. This was the guy who could have been winning you games. Not a problem. So yeah, I was this rebel. I was this imaginative guy.
So you're an INTJ, is that right?
At Procter & Gamble, I was.
Right, okay. So I was an INFJ, which is a protagonist. That's what I was when I did the Myers-Briggs. The next thing it takes me on to is when you spoke about your, what was it, liquid joy. All I could think about was your Cabernet in the last video. I could only think about your Cabernet and how your first experience wasn't that. But in terms of your story, bringing us forward, it really taking us through different parts of, how you managed to kind of the formulation for a start, going through to the kind of the person-on-person conflict and dealing with people as a person and not what we're taught through society. So you were pretty much of a rebel, John. You go against the grain in every single way, shape or form that you can, not to cause trouble, but to get the truth and to get, to get the job done and how people does it. Now, there was something in there that just kind of came to my mind in the way that Johnny Reb was always Johnny Reb, even before he was Johnny Reb, if that makes sense. So in terms of where we're going next in this, so obviously you did your formulation. Now, formulation, if you can just describe that to people, please, because I don't know if everyone understands quite. I know you told us what it was, but in order for you to say that you've learned that yourself, If you could just explain to people what that was.
So what happens is, and we're going to talk about this more because formulation is essentially the same as alchemy.
Yep.
It's basically how you blend things together, the order you blend them, the conditions under which you get totally different results. And the formulation is the thing that's going to carry me. So I will definitely talk more about that in the later, but I'll explain formulation from this standpoint, the second thing. So the architect or the INTJ is known as strategic. And this comes out in metrics. And one of the things I learned big time at Procter & Gamble was metrics. And I use this to this day. People know that I use this mantra all the time. What are you measuring and how are you measuring it? I would always say that. And Procter & Gamble was the king of that. Because think about it. You have an underarm roll-on. You want to prove it's better than someone else's underarm roll-on. How are you going to prove it? What are you going to measure and how are you going to measure it? Well, we're going to have a person, the same person stand. We're going to put one thing under one product A under one armpit, product B under the other armpit. We're going to have the person stand in a room that's 100 degrees, 80% humidity for 15 minutes. And then we're going to have a trained tester sniff under both their arms and rate them. That's the test. What did you measure? How'd you measure it? And that became my mantra for everything in life. What are you measuring and how are you measuring it? So what happened on Liquid Tide was this project was $9 million over budget. And then what they were trying to do was they were trying to put this chemical in called an oligomer. And what an oligomer is, it's like a polymer. It's a many chain structure. But a polymer is you form this polymer and it ends and it's this length. An oligomer, you start forming it and then you turn off the reaction. Oh, at 7 minutes. Oh, at 5 minutes. So you got to imagine there's this chemical and it has 1, 2, 3, up to 9 units on it. So if you can imagine like, a chain, there's 1s, 2s, all the way to 9s. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to have Liquid Tide deposited on people's clothes so that if they get something greasy, it forms a barrier and gets it off. And there's 3 companies giving us these oligomers and we're trying them and to see which ones works. And the whole project's a mess. And that's what I get brought in. Kind of like my dad bring in after the fact to go fix this project, John. No one seems to be able to fix this project. So what I did was I formulated Liquid Tide with a hole because part of that product is water. So you start with some water and you start adding ingredients and you keep adding ingredients and stir and heat and cool and change the pH. You do all these different steps. It's like a recipe. Chemists are really good cooks. So I like to cook. So you're cooking basically. And what happens is I stopped 5% short. There's 95% of this product in, there's 5% left. I can pour 5% water and I'd be done. So I left a hole. And then what I did was I had the analytical people, I picked all these different jars of samples and I had them analyze it, how many 1s through 9s. And I was looking for different distributions. I didn't want all the same distribution. I had 9 different versions or 10 different versions of different chemicals, that they were sending us. And then what I did was I would put each of those in at like 1%. And fill in the hole, 1.25, 1.5. And what I was doing was I was trying to find out how much of this chemical could go into this product and still be clear. So I used to hold up jars. I'd hold it up to a window. There was a tree and I'd go, can I still see the leaves? Wasn't my measuring how do I measure it? Clarity. And can I see the leaves through this jar? Then I know it's clear. So I had the solubility of these 10. And then I put it in a computer. Now I have 9 unknowns. I have 10 equations and I'm solving for solubility. So I used the equation and I solved for it. And the coefficient in front of everything would be its solubility. And the 1s, 2s, and 3s had a negative number, which means they're solvents. And I went, and the 4, 5s, and 6s were doing all the cleaning. And I went, oh, if I could find a sample that looked like this or looked like this,
Yep.
I could use less. I can get the same amount of effective. I don't have to spend all this money. I removed $9 million out of that formula, and they were able to launch it. It was a miracle. And we had to write these things called bi-weeklies. Every 2 weeks, we had to write what we were doing, and it got circulated throughout the company. On Joy, I had made a Joy product at a higher pH that was stable in all their freeze-thaw and different things. No one had ever done it before. And everybody in the company had seen it. That's why I got pulled to Liquid Tide. So I get pulled to Liquid Tide because I'd done this, amazing thing in formulating again, because I did the formulating. And so now I figured out how to save $9 million because of this, the strategic aspect of this test method. The problem was before, so I jumped to the end, but the process of it, back to Johnny Reb, is when I wrote my, report, I said 1s, 2s, and 3s are solvents. The PhDs lost their minds. The people who'd been working on the project had said, no, it wasn't, because they had said that. They marched me in front of a guy 3 levels up and said, tell him what you just wrote about. I said, 1s, 2s, and 3s are solvents. They are not. He's lying. I'm like, this is what's best for the product, but you don't want to admit you're wrong. And I'm getting trashed for that. I just went ahead and did it. And I will tell you, to jump ahead, several years later, I was at an American Oil Chemists Society meeting, and you'll hear more about those in the future. And there's Procter & Gamble doing a presentation on the paper of, guess what we found out? The 1s, 2s, and 3s in this oligomer are a solvent. And I just sat there and went, yeah, it took them like 6-7 years to publicly state what I got trashed for saying in private. Makes sense.
It just shows you though, and it's all to do with the bigger system, isn't it? Once as we've spoken about going through our videos, we get to the bigger system never wants to admit it's wrong. So when it comes to like formulation, whether it's detergents, whether it's mental health, whether it's education, if you're able to go and show them something that's not able, it proves they've been wrong the whole time, they're not willing to admit it until it gets to the point where there's no turning back. That's the point where they'll come in. So that's where I feel that it's kind of
right. So the last thing about an INTJ is they are a planner. Now remember, our job was project management. So what I did was, your job all day was managing, getting this project through the system and dealing with all these people, and you just never had time for anything except lunch. So what I did was I would come into work 2 hours early. I would get all my work done, all my formulating, all this other stuff done. And at lunchtime, I would walk around the building. Now remember, there are about 40 products, multi-million dollar products being made in this building. And every product has at least one project to make it better and one project to make it cheaper. So there's at least 80, and then the bigger projects have more of that. There's 100 projects going on in this building. So what I used to spend my lunchtime doing is I'd walk into your office, Colin, and let's say you're working on Cascade, which is an automatic dishwashing detergent. And I'd say, hey, you got a moment? And if you said no, I'd move on. If you said, yeah, I'd say, how's it going on Cascade? Now, people love to talk about themselves. Yeah. You're going to tell me everything going on with Cascade. I had 2 rules. I'm not going to tell you what to do, and I'm not going to try to solve your problem. You have a chance to tell me everything going on in your project. I'm learning your project. I'm interning. When a doctor interns, the reason why they walk him around is they're trying to load his brain with all these experiences. I'm like, I am going to load my brain with all these experiences. When I left Procter & Gamble, I had the experience of over 200 multi-million dollar projects in my brain. I got to the point where I could tell you if a project is going to succeed or fail. I have a whole analogy. I think we're going to do a video about this, of how I assess every project and show you. I have a whole model for it. And this is how I figured out, because there's a lot of ways a project can go and not go. But I became a master at getting projects out the door on time, under budget, and telling other people, don't mess with that. It's never going to go. And here's the reasons why I'd be able to explain it. But I walked around and did that. And so what happened was when I left Procter & Gamble, they made a rule that you weren't allowed to do that. Because when I left and they found out, wait, he just walked out the door and he knows everything about all these projects, there was a rule actually made about me in product development that you couldn't do that. So what happened to me was I got tired of dealing with an unintelligent customer. And this one story, I could tell you a ton of stories. Trust me, we could do this for 8 hours. But I'll tell you one quick story I dealt with when I was on Joy. Dawn gets grease. It cuts grease. And the test for it is we'd have this polypropylene cup, a plastic cup with some proprietary grease, and grease wants to stick to plastic. And what they would do is they'd have all this stuff to do that. They'd put the cup, submerge it in Dawn, and they'd time how long it took for all the grease to get taken off. And they'd go against other people. And it used to take 1.5 minutes. For Dawn and everybody else was a lot more time. We had this polymer that removed it in 27 seconds. It clearly was the best grease cleaner you've ever seen in your life. It thinned out Dawn though. Dawn became watery, but it performed great. We put it in a test. These women took the bottle. They get a bottle of Dawn, a bottle of this new Dawn. They go like this and go, you watered this down. We go, no, ma'am, try it. They try it. They come back. They go, this one didn't work. We know it works. It didn't work. We do the same test in an opaque bottle where they can't see it. This is the greatest grease cleaner I've ever seen.
Right, okay. Because
I could tell you a million stories. I could tell you a million stories about that. And I got so frustrated. And one more thing before you say something is everybody under 30 in that building had ulcers. And everybody over 30 had a heart attack when I was there. And I don't know how much of it was the stress we all were dealing with, because it was a very stressful job. I used to say it was like getting my MBA. Like, you want to go get your MBA, but you don't want to live in MBA school. And part of it was you're dealing with a customer that no one could figure out. How are you? This is in fact better than this. And they say it's worse.
Because of the way they're looking at it. It's because they're looking at it rather than looking away from it to see where it's coming from. And this is obviously, again, taking us on to another part of the videos that we've done. We've done over 100 now. And again, it's down to the way that people look at it. And that's why when you take their sight away with the opaque bottle, they can't look at it the same way.
Right. So it's what are they measuring and how do they measure it? So
Yep.
The two things I learned at Procter & Gamble, number one, I learned metrics. What are you measuring and how do you measure it? That means everything. If you can't account for that, you might be introducing error. You might not be really getting to the issue.
Yep.
And that was always the trick with these customers is what are they measuring and how do they measure it? So I became this leading edge modeler with these designed experiments. I was using these computers and I was doing stuff no one had done. I was solving problems no one could solve. I had already become a PhD modeler from my college, but now I added this ability to see in 7 dimensions, and I add this computer application onto it. And all of a sudden now I'm seeing in 31 dimensions with the computer. Because if you have 31 ingredients or 35 ingredients or whatever in liquid Tide, you're going to see in over 30 dimensions. That's what I was doing, is I was modeling in over 30 dimensions with all that. But I did not want to deal with an unintelligent customer, and that's why I left.
It's mega. So basically you weren't, was it the ignorance that was getting to you, or was it because they weren't willing to understand?
There was a number of things, but part of it was I had an ulcer. Okay. I was one of the people who had an ulcer. And part of it was I knew I was smarter than this. And I remember working at Dow in the summers, and you show someone a graph and they take it. I called Dow up and they go, John, come back. We definitely want you. Come back to Dow. And so I end up going to Dow because I want to deal with an intelligent customer.
I like that. That's nice. So did you feel that energetically you were more matched to Dow because they just got you better? Or do you believe it was the ego of the larger company?
We'll see, but I think part of it was I had the greatest summer of my life there. I couldn't wait to get back.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to hearing about that summer. So, listen, thank you so much on your story, and I'm looking forward to hearing the next one because I genuinely, this is one of the ones I've been looking for because I want to see what Johnny Reb got up to when he wasn't being a rebel at work. Take it easy. Thanks, John.
Bye.
Bye.